Ladies and gentlemen, we're delighted that you'll join us for our keynote for Congregational Conversations. As our guest makes his way greeting, I think it's a good thing. I could read you all the accolades and all the history of our president of Union for Reform Judaism, Rick Jacobs. I've had the pleasure of studying with him, and I have to tell you, I was once paired with him. We were dealing with a difficult subject, and we got paired off together, and they teased, and somebody looked and said, looked at the two of us and asked the question, does size really matter? In terms of rabbis, so I think it does, because we're going to talk tonight about dealing with a book where a brilliant scholar has written a book, and we talk about it. He was the chief rabbi of the UK. The chief rabbi of all of the UK. He's incredibly impressive. And he's a little bit taller than I am. Actually, I'm taller than he is. But the reality is that we give an accolades and look, and we talk about this. And we're about to hear from a man who is the head of an organization. There are 250,000 Jews in all of the UK. Rabbi Jacobs, at the lowest estimate, is the rabbi of the organization of when we ask, and the Pew Foundation talks about who are Reform Jews in America. On the low end, it's 1.5 million. On the high end, it's 1.9 million. And we are incredibly lucky because Rick Jacobs is a remarkable human being who is in the body of a very large rabbi. And he is tall in every way. But what is very important is that he creates an opportunity, and what he has done as a congregational rabbi, what he has done as a worker in Brooklyn, what he has done in the camps, what I'm sure he did as a dancer, is still the same today as when I sat across from him in that situation where we were doing a discussion. He is a human being that is driven by a great love of Judaism, a great compassion for the Jewish people, and a relationship with God that makes him see every human being. In the book, in the chapter that we'll read, the text from Genesis 37, they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. It's Joseph's brothers looking at him. They saw him from a distance, and they plotted to kill him. This sentence, like so many others in the Joseph narrative, has two meanings. On the surface, it means what it says. They saw him approach, and they planned to murder. Yet on another level, however, it's a philosophical statement about love and hate. They were able to contemplate fratricide because they saw him at a distance. They refused to allow him to come close. He was a threat rather than a person. Rabbi Jacobs is a person who never looks at an individual from a distance. And I thought of him and I asked him a question, and I'm going to do a disclaimer because I'm pretty sure my Hebrew is correct, but I want to be sure. Emmanuel Levinas has a statement that says, "From the first moment that another one looks at me, I have a responsibility to him or her, even if I didn't take the responsibility. I have the responsibility." I'm going to read that again. It's a very powerful statement. It's the antithetical to what that idea of distance. From the moment that the other looks at me, I have a responsibility towards him, even if I didn't take the responsibility. I have the responsibility. It's important to know that in Hebrew, the word for pupil is B'ishanean, which can be translated, actually, the slang for it is ish katan. Why? Because when you look in the eye of someone, you see your reflection in the pupil of the eye. Rick Jacobs, as our leader, approaches every problem, every situation, and will give us a response that is a response of a liberal perspective on this very, very difficult question, not in God's name. He will give it because his perspective is of a leader, of a human being who always, always sees the other in the reflection of his eyes. It makes him a powerful leader. It makes him a great friend. It makes him somebody we are honored to have as our scholar, as our teacher this evening. Rick, we thank you for being here.
Thank you, Rabbi Lustig. That was it was beautiful, and I'm touched not only by your introduction, but by your friendship and by your extraordinary leadership of this great congregation. I have to say, I spent last Friday afternoon sitting in the seat in front of Rabbi Lustig as we drove to Haifa to spend Shabbat with a wonderful, growing, dynamic congregation there. And on the way back, Rabbi Lustig was on the phone convincing the powers that be, and it didn't matter what the question was, I put my money on Rabbi Lustig. I said, I know he's going to convince this person, and give me the phone, I just tell this person, stop. Just say yes. And it's a tzedakah wager, because we wouldn't wager otherwise. And I arrived today to find out exactly right. He persuaded this individual. It is a privilege to be here. I knew this was going to be a special day. I got on the train in New York this morning at 9 o'clock, and there was a seat next to me. And you never wonder in travel who's going to fill up that seat, because it can always be a distraction. And this very tall guy sits down next to me, and I'm looking at this guy going, I know him. How do I know him? Turned out it was David Gregory. David Gregory and I have been trying to actually find a time to sit together for months. But evidently God thought that this morning was the right time. So we spent 3 hours on the train. The people were shushing us all around. A Reform Jew, a person of deep faith, and frankly a reflection of where we need to go as a faith community, and very, very touched by his words and by his book, and frankly by his courage. It's a privilege to be here with my rabbinic colleagues here at Washington Hebrew, incredible group of lay leaders as well. I'm looking around, the Reform movement just in this room could probably power the next 25 years just by the wisdom and the dedication and the commitment here. So it is a privilege, frankly, to be here. And when Rabbi Lustig invited me to come and speak in this series, and knowing that Rabbi Sacks is really one of the giants of contemporary Jewish life. There's no other way to say it. He's both brilliant and charming and articulate, and someone who frankly embodies really the very best of our Jewish tradition. But I'm not here tonight to say amen alone. I'm here to do what in our tradition we call a machloket l'shem shamayim, an argument for the sake of heaven. So I would like to both lift up and celebrate some of his core statements in his book, Not in God's Name, but I would like to take issue as well. I figure that's what you brought me here to do. And that's, I believe, what this book demands. First of all, it demands a close read. And I love the structure of what you're doing as a congregation, which is to not just have a chance to hear him read the book, but to gather in small groups and really digest and debate and find the ikar, find the essence for our world, for our community, for our day. Rabbi Sacks makes a pretty clear statement. He says in one simple line, how is it that people kill in the name of the God of life, wage war in the name of the God of peace, hate in the name of the God of love, and practice cruelty in the name of the God of compassion? Well, I think we all probably have asked that question, and so have so many of the thousands and millions who actually stay at arm's length from religion, because it does call into question our very core calling as people of faith. Encyclopedia of War tells us something that maybe we didn't know, that in 1,800 conflicts, only 10% of those wars were religious wars. That there's something in the human condition that leads us to be violent with one another. And it's not the case that religion is the cause, but it is certainly the case in our day where religion demands a closer look to figure out what is at the heart of why people kill in the name of God, and what does that tell us about our day and our calling. So I want to ask tonight, is religion to blame for the endless wars and religious violence, or is religion part of the solution? Rabbi Sacks says the second. He says that what we need to counter that which is done in the name of religion can only be found within religion. That the secular world has actually found itself bankrupt and unable to respond. But my simple thesis tonight is religion can be a core answer, but not just any kind of religion. Particular commitments within that religious faith. So I believe that what is really, really dangerous isn't simply those who kill in the name of God, and they are dangerous, and they are not few. And by the way, they are not found only within one faith tradition. I hate to bring that to some of the political discourse of our day, which would locate some of that hatred and some of that religious violence within only one faith community. But as Rabbi Sacks points out, even in the God of love Christian tradition, there are some of the most brutal and bloody centuries in all of human history. And the Jewish tradition, we're not actually free from that violence in the name of God either. And unfortunately, it's not only in biblical times that we have such violence. We actually see some of that today. Rabbi Sacks says that sibling rivalry is one of the reasons why we in life have tension with people who are close to us. And he rightfully points out that Judaism and Christianity, we are siblings. Judaism and Islam, we are siblings. He is right to point out that it is a sibling rivalry, and his analysis of the narratives in Genesis are nothing short of brilliant. But they miss one key point. It is not just between our faiths that we see sibling rivalry, but what we witness today within our faith is a kind of rivalry and at times incitement, at times simply denigrating Jewish community to other Jewish communities. I'll be more explicit in a moment. The other thing that's incredibly dangerous in the history of religion is political power and religious authority. It's not a good idea. It never was. And we see in our world places where religious authority is fused with political power. And we in the United States of America, we have a pretty strong safeguard against that. We call it the separation of religion and state. Where that does not exist, this danger is even greater. Rabbi Sacks wisely points out that there's a dualism that threatens our world, where we demonize another, whoever that other might be. And we identify our faith community as righteous and true, and all who are not with us, they are the dark force. And when you look at that world in the dualistic way that he points out, there is no doubt that we could not only go off the rails, but that danger and violence and hatred in the name of God will follow soon thereafter. But I want to put a bigger thesis in front of us today. And that is that today to be a person of faith oftentimes means that we are intolerant, we are self-righteous, we are hostile to science and the best of human thought. And that many people, Rabbi Lustig wisely and correctly pointed out that our movement is the largest movement in Jewish life. We're larger than the Orthodox, conservative, and Reconstructionist movements combined. But if you actually think about all the people who are outside of not just our movement, but all movements, that's the majority. And I would just maintain that one of the reasons that people take leave of organized religion is not from disinterest, but oftentimes from disgust. They look at what we seemingly stand for. I don't mean we, Washington Hebrew Congregation, because it doesn't get better than this. But I mean we as the religious community of the world. And so many of those written about in the Pew Study have walked away from what they see as a corrupt and frankly embarrassing expression of religion in the world. So for us, what's at stake is religion. What's at stake is a religion of depth and purpose and of vision and courage, all the things that frankly make our Reform Judaism so powerful. But I'm not here to tell you that Reform Judaism is the answer to all that ails religion. I actually think what we got is really impressive and frankly what people hunger for. But the bigger frame for me tonight is that what we need is religion that is pluralistic. And I want to be very, very specific about defining what a pluralistic religion is. A pluralistic religion says that our way is not the only way. Our way is not the only truth. And it's not just being tolerant. Being tolerant is very important. What does it mean to be tolerant? It means that I can be with you in your different views of politics or religion or art, whatever it might be. I may not agree with you. I may not think you have validity in your belief, but I am tolerant. I accept that you have those views. A pluralist is somebody who believes in the fiber of their being that there's more than one truth, that my way is not the only way. You can be a pluralist within the religious community, and you can be a pluralist in any setting. And I would say that with all of the respect that I have for Rabbi Sacks, I think plainly described, he's not a pluralist. He actually doesn't believe that there are multiple, authentic, valid ways to be Jewish. How do I know that? I know that from what he writes. And by the way, I respect what he writes. I know that because during his long tenure and very distinguished tenure as the chief rabbi in the UK, it was not his practice to accord the Reform movement or the liberal movement not only standing, but basic inclusion in the wider Jewish community. So that's, I believe, simply a description of how he views the Jewish world. And by the way, that may seem like a benign stance, but not in the Jewish world that we are living in today. That can't be described as benign. So I want to describe some of the places where the lack of pluralism is literally eating away at our community and also our religious community, our Jewish community. So we know that in the classic text of pluralism in the Babylonian Talmud and tractate, Eruvin is a debate between two schools of thought. They're kind of the Harvard-Yale of the Jewish, rabbinic mind. Hillel and Shammai. Hillel and Shammai in the Talmud, Eruvin 13b, are having an argument about some important matter. It goes on for 3 years. Finally, there's a bat kol that comes and resolves it. But the key thing is this is one of these debates for the sake of heaven. And Hillel wins. Why? The text tells us. Because Hillel had such a respect for the views of Shammai that when he would make his own case, the first thing he would do is make the case for Shammai and then only at the end make his own case. that he was the embodiment of pluralism. The idea that there's more than one way to understand a problem, more than one way to solve a political issue. And Hillel's teaching to us is that we live in a Jewish community that has not enough of that pluralistic approach. So let me tell you a story about an unbelievable Orthodox rabbi who was my chavruta, my study partner for a number of years, Rabbi Jacob Rubenstein of blessed memory. He called me up Erev Rosh Hashanah a number of years back. He said, "Rick, I did it." I said, "Mazel tov, that's great. What did you do?" He said, "I finally did it. I got the rabbis, the Orthodox rabbis in our neighborhood of Westchester County, just a little bit north of New York City, to move the path of the Eruv." You know, the Eruv is that, in a sense, string that encircles a community. And if you're inside the Eruv, it's easy to celebrate, to travel, to share wonderful sacred time with others. Well, it turns out he moved the Eruv to include Westchester Reform Temple. And he fought for years to get the other Orthodox rabbis who said, "Why are you trying to do this? Why do you want them inside the Eruv? Let's put them outside the Eruv." He said, "No. Let's make it easy for our community to celebrate joy together and to be together on Shabbat and holidays." Well, he called me up, Erev Rosh Hashanah. He was like bursting, and I started to cry. It was the most beautiful thing. He fought and fought and fought. He won this for us. I get to synagogue that night. I tell the first person I could find who is a classical Reformed, longtime member of the synagogue, and I say, "Can you believe we're now inside the Eruv?" This man looks at me and said, "That is the most irrelevant, archaic, anachronistic nonsense." I said, "I don't think you get it." He said, "What don't I get?" I said, "He drew a map of his Jewish world and he put us inside of it. That's an unbelievable statement." I said, "But your reaction suggests that he's not inside your map." I said, "I think we need to redraw our map." So here's my question to you. Is Rabbi Rubenstein a pluralist, or is he merely tolerant? What do you think? Is that an example of someone who says that there's more than one authentic way to be Jewish? Well, you don't necessarily know enough about Rabbi Rubenstein, who was a brilliant, extraordinary Orthodox rabbi. I actually, in his presence, said, "I think you're one of the most gifted, tolerant rabbis, but you are not a pluralist," and that's not a denigration of his faith, but he actually didn't believe that there were authentically other paths in Judaism. He wanted to be respectful, but he didn't want to dignify. He articulates the same position that Rabbi Sacks does. Now, where do I want to bring this to a sense of urgency? I want to bring this to a sense of urgency by talking about sibling rivalry, not in terms of Judaism and Christianity, but in terms of Orthodox, conservative, and Reform. What's the sibling rivalry? Well, it turns out that anybody else a parent of more than one child? My middle son's here in D.C., and I can tell you they keep track, those kids. Mom always liked you best. Dad has always had a special eye for you. But it turns out if you study, and psychologists have studied, in fact, one particular psychologist in particular, Ellen Weber Libby, in her book, The Favorite Child, says that if you pay attention to the biblical narratives, it's not just about favorite children, but favorite actually can rotate. And in the healthiest of families, it's not that there's a favorite, but it goes back and forth, and sometimes it goes among many children. I'd like to say that one of the most dangerous things we have in our Jewish religion, take a deep breath, is the chosen people concept, because it basically says that we're the favorite child. And if we go around the world telling everybody we're the favorite child, did you read the story of Joseph? You didn't? You know the story, and Rabbi Sacks tells it beautifully. Joseph told everybody that he was the favorite child. It didn't work out so well for him. Now, who was the favorite child between Isaac and Ishmael? Turns out the older, the firstborn, is Ishmael, but the favorite one in the binding of Isaac, that narrative that we read on the high holidays, when God says, "Take your son," Which one? Your favorite one. God, don't ask a parent to find the favorite one. And don't ask the peoples of the world to pick the favorite people of God. It's dangerous whenever we privilege one over another in that way, in that divine favor, or in our families. It is the underpinning not only to rivalry and tension, it can be the underpinning to, frankly, to hatred and also to violence. So I want to just frame that for us, as the Reform movement, for us, we actually believe that universalism is an essential part of our Jewish tradition. We don't just worry about our people. When there is a plane crash, we don't just ask how many Jews were on the plane. We ask how many of God's children died in that tragedy. I remember when Ruth Messenger asked me to go to Haiti right after the earthquake. And I realized that I didn't have all the right vaccinations and shots. So I called up my doctor because I had to get the shots quickly. And I said, can I come in today? I need to get all these vaccinations caught up. And she said, sure, but give me a heads up. Where are you going now? I said, I'm going to Haiti. And she said, Rabbi Jacobs, can I just break you some news? There are no Jews in Haiti. Why are you going? I said, thank you for the heads up. I understand there's actually there was one Jewish family living in Haiti at the time. I said, I'm not going to Haiti because of the Jewish people. I'm going to Haiti because God's people are suffering mightily. And I got my 7 or 8 shots and I went off. We have a tradition, and by the way, it's not the Reform tradition, it's the Jewish tradition, which is that God created a world and God created all the people in this world. And we have a responsibility. We have a universe of obligation. And that is a fundamental part of who we are. So when we think about that universalism and particularism, there's some of those in our people who are very focused on the particularism. They're very focused on the Jewish family part. And there's some who are very focused on the universal family, the everyone. And there's some of us who live in dynamic tension between those two. That is the place, I think, we as people of faith struggle and ultimately need to ground our vision of a world of tolerance, a world of justice, a world of courage, a world of compassion with a commitment to our own Jewish family, which brings me to the state of Israel. Rabbi Lustig and I were just there. Rabbi Shankman was there with us. Luckily, some of the rest of the staff had to stay behind to make sure that the Jewish people were well cared for. But we've had some of the most eventful last few weeks in the state of Israel. You've read about some of it. I want to just frame it in terms of Rabbi Sacks' teaching, and I want to frame it in terms of pluralism, and I want to frame it in terms of redefining what faith could be in our day. So some of you know that the ultra-Orthodox in Israel aren't just a group of people, but they actually hold political power. They sit in the coalition. They're part of coalition politics. They oversee budgets. They set policy. It's not the sort of the rabbinic world of North America where everybody's in it and there's a level playing field. And we have been appropriately raising not only a challenge to this, but working very strategically to change it. You might have noticed a few weeks ago the government of Israel did something historic. They voted as a government. Prime Minister Netanyahu led this. They voted to create an egalitarian prayer space at the Western Wall. Why? Why did they do it? Was that because of pluralism? It was because this issue was actually giving the state of Israel a black eye. I'll give you just the one moment where it became crystallized. Anat Hoffman, who leads our Reform Movement Social Action work in Israel, went with Women of the Wall. She was chair of the Women of the Wall for all these years, for 27 years. They've gone for every Rosh Chodesh and have held a prayer service. Anat Hoffman did what we could do here at Washington Hebrew without any thought of it. She put a prayer shawl on, a talit, and she prayed the Shema out loud. And what happened to her? She was not only taken away by the police, she was thrown in jail and spent the night with a prostitute and a car thief for her crime of wearing a tallis and praying the Shema out loud. Friends, when that morning dawned and Prime Minister Netanyahu heard this story and Anat called us to tell us that story, we knew that something had gone wrong, not just with the Jewish people, but with the Jewish dream for our return to our homeland. Prime Minister Netanyahu said to Natan Sharansky, then the chair and currently still the chair of the Jewish Agency, Natan, make this go away, fix it, find out some way to share this holy space. Find a way for the Jewish people to live together in some semblance of tolerance and harmony. And for the last 3 years, we've worked together with the conservative movement, Women of the Wall, the Jewish Agency, the Federations of North America, and the government of Israel to find a solution. And we found a solution. It's a compromise. It's not perfect. And it's based, from our end, on pluralism. Why? Because the solution is good for us and it's good for the ultra-Orthodox. Were we really concerned about whether it would be a good solution for the ultra-Orthodox? Yes, because we're pluralists. We believe that our way is not the only way to live authentic Jewish lives of meaning and purpose. So the arrangement is that Women of the Wall will leave the agitation of every month praying in the women's section of, quote, the Northern Kotel Plaza, and we will have for the first time a beautiful and quite conducive, egalitarian, pluralistic prayer space at the Western Wall. Notice the word egalitarian. Notice the word pluralistic. Our side is going to have a group of people overseeing it for the first time. They will include Reform leaders, conservative leaders, Women of the Wall, and leaders of the larger Israeli society. We're going to oversee the policy and the budget, and that's the first time in the history of the State of Israel, and we're going to do it differently. And we're not going to be antagonistic, and we're not going to be exclusivist. We're going to be pluralists. We're going to say there are many ways to pray authentically. Ours is one of them, and we're going to uphold that with strength and with conviction. So if that were the end of the story, we could go home and you wouldn't have anything to talk about in your small groups and we wouldn't have anything to ask questions about. But what we did in that decision is we stepped on a hornet's nest. And the hornets are literally really agitated. Who are the hornets? The ultra-Orthodox leadership, the political, religious leadership of the ultra-Orthodox in Israel have gotten so worked up about us, about our success, that they are spewing out hatred, the likes of which is really staggering. I actually wouldn't feel comfortable reading to you what they have said in the last 3 weeks about us. And not only would I not feel comfortable sharing it, I would feel remiss as a Jewish leader to engage in a back and forth. So I was on Israeli radio last week on Galei Tzahal, which is the Israeli army radio, which turns out to be one of the larger bands in Israel. And I was being interviewed, and the gentleman said, would you stay on the line? I have one of the ultra-Orthodox members of Knesset who seems to hate your movement. He's next on line. Would you like to talk to him on the show? I said, it would be my pleasure. So Rabbi Yisrael Eichler joins the conversation, and the interviewer says, Rabbi Eichler, I have Rabbi Rick Jacobs of the Reform movement. Would you like to talk to him? And Rabbi Eichler said, I did not agree to talk to anyone but you. So the interviewer whispered, because they have a little technology thing, he says, you've got him on the line. Say whatever you want to say. So in Hebrew, I said to him, I said, member of Knesset Eichler, I said, I would so much love the opportunity to sit with you, to share with you the vitality, the vibrancy, and the depth of the Reformed Jewish community, and to brainstorm with you how we could work together on behalf of the Jewish people and the state of Israel. Click. And he hung up, which wasn't a surprise. But friends, we are pluralists, and we are going to live out the core commitments. Rabbi Sacks speaks with such dignity and elegance at all times. Even though he's not a pluralist, he exemplifies, I think, the qualities of menschlichkeit and the very, very core of our tradition. But I would tell you that we have an opportunity to continue to reshape Israeli society where Jewishness is what people choose to make of it. It's not imposed by a chief rabbi. It's not imposed by the chief Reform rabbis. We don't actually have chief Reform rabbis. And we could make Israel the place of Jewish pluralism and Jewish vitality to mirror the Jewish vitality that we have here in North America. I would love for Rabbi Sacks and others to understand that we actually have something to both teach and learn from one another about the different expressions of the Jewish tradition. Now, he points out that some of the divisions within our faith community has led to not only an exclusivist claim to religion and to truth, but to hatred and to violence. What I would say to Rabbi Sacks is pay close attention. The state of Israel is the greatest miracle the Jewish people have experienced in 2,000 years, but there's religious violence in the state of Israel. There's incitement against not only our movement, against Women of the Wall, against people who have the audacity to think differently and to pray differently and to live Jewish lives of difference in the state of Israel. Think about Yigal Amir. Yigal Amir is the young man who murdered Yitzhak Rabin. He murdered Yitzhak Rabin because he didn't like what Rabin stood for. Well, you're entitled to not like a politician or a rabbi or anyone. But what happened in Israel was the incitement. I'm not making a moral equivalence to the incitement that goes on in other faith communities and other states around the world. But I would say to Rabbi Sacks and to us, let's not be blind to that strand of Judaism, which was not healed in antiquity, as Rabbi Sacks claims. He claims, and it is the beauty of our tradition, that we teach empathy. 36 times the Bible says, the Hebrew Bible says, love the stranger. Not like him, not tolerate her, but love the stranger. We have tried to extirpate that hatred, that demonizing of the other, but I will just tell you what you already know. We have not fully removed that strand from our tradition. It can't be removed entirely. And yes, we could look at others, and we could look at other faith communities, and some of our candidates who are busy talking about our country and our world are telling us that there's only one faith that has violent extremists. We know otherwise, and they are all dangerous. And I'm not going to quantify and say how many are ours, and ours are only a few, so it's not a significant issue. It's a significant issue because it tarnishes the very tradition that we love. I had the opportunity this past fall to visit two families. The first family I visited was the Henkin family. You may be aware of their story. Rabbi Henkin and his wife were murdered by Palestinian terrorists in front of their 4 children. It's one of the most brutal, callous acts, frankly, that I think we could ever learn of. And I went to pay a condolence call to Rabbanit Henkin, the mother of the father of these 4 children. And it was just breathtaking, the way she expressed love for the entire Jewish people, the way she expressed her responsibility not just for Orthodox Jews, but for all of her people, and the pain of raising these 4 children without a mother and a father. The next day, I went to Tel HaShomer Hospital in Tel Aviv. It's the largest hospital in Israel. Dr. Rafi Walden, who is the deputy director of the hospital, took me to visit a patient. Rafi Walden is a member of our Reform congregation in Tel Aviv, Beit Daniel. I'm looking at Miriam Daniels here and want to always just acknowledge this extraordinary movement that's growing in Israel. So Rafi Walden invited me, said, Rick, you should come do the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim, because we have a patient here who is living a Job-like scenario. So I went to visit 4-year-old Ahmed Dawabshe. Ahmed lives in a village in the West Bank. It's the village of Duma. And one morning this past summer, their home was firebombed. And his mother and his father and his younger brother were all killed in the attack. and he is sitting day in and day out, being treated at the best hospital for burns in Israel. And Rafi Walden and I went in to visit Ahmed and his grandparents. And I said, not in God's name. And by the way, did we know who did it? Well, the people who perpetrated this arson attack wrote in Hebrew, horrific, or beautiful Hebrew, not the kind that you copy, but the kind that you know. And it came from a place of hate. I want to apologize on behalf of the Jewish people for what had happened and to ask what we could do to support the family. Now, why do I tell you those two stories? I tell you those two stories because it's a story about siblings. It's a story about religious violence. It's a story about intolerance. And it's a story about our people. We are the victims of religious hate, and we are also, at times, the perpetrators of religious hate. So let's not give ourselves a bye. Let's hold that mirror up, and let's be dutiful and diligent about making sure that the Judaism that we teach, that we practice, is the Judaism that expresses the very best of the Jewish tradition. I think about the way in which our tradition, as Rabbi Sacks beautifully said, and by the way, he just received the Templeton Prize. Maybe you saw that in the news. It's $1.5 million goes to somebody who really expresses a very, very inspired spirituality. He deserves the award. And when people were thinking about Syrian Muslims coming not only to Europe but to the UK and to North America, Rabbi Sacks, to his credit, with the best of the Jewish tradition, said those are people we are obligated to shelter, to embrace. And I would just tell you that the Reform movement, we're out in front on this. Why is it that the Reform movement is fighting to include Syrian Muslims in our community? Are the Syrian Muslims respectful of the state of Israel or the Jewish community? They don't have that reputation. But they happen to have one very key distinguishing factor. They too are children of the same God that we pray to. And they are living hell. And it is our not only obligation, it's our opportunity to practice the best of our faith. Are they going to love us? Because our Canadian Reformed congregations, every single one has adopted a Syrian Muslim community. Are they going to be celebrated and new bonds of friendship? That they might, but we're not certain. But we know that the Judaism that we practice is not a Judaism of tribalism, a Judaism of particularity. It's a Judaism of nobility. We have 15 Reformed summer camps. Our summer camp in Bruceville, Texas, this winter sheltered 600 refugees from Central America, children, who are being debated in our various legislatures whether they could remain in the United States. So we said, while the political leaders debate this, let's welcome them into our camp. And they not only slept in the same beds that our kids sleep in and ate at the same cafeteria, the same dining room, and used the same beautiful facilities, but it expressed our expression of Judaism, a Judaism that is respectful of the many ways, not only that our Jewish people practice faith, but that other faith traditions also have an integrity and a vitality and a legitimacy. I tell you these stories because for Rabbi Sacks, I would want to have the chance to make the case that what we sorely lack is not simply a religious response to violence in the name of God, but what we lack is the kind of underpinning to our faith where we don't have exclusive claims to faith. We don't have a sense that our religion, our Judaism, is the only true religion, that God only really loves us. And within our people, it's not the case that we only have Reform, or we only have Conservative, or we only have Orthodox. We have all these expressions. They are expressions of the true and living God, and there is no right and wrong when it comes to that. I want to just have a few concluding observations, and one of the observations is it came with a certain political discussion that we had with leaders of the current Israeli government who said, "Are you going to be happy now? Are you going to be quiet now? Are you going to stop agitating now?" And the answer is, of course not. But we're going to agitate with love and with strategy. And we're going to agitate because democracy is at stake, Judaism is at stake, the well-being of our people is at stake, and the well-being of the state of Israel is at stake. I remember walking into the Prime Minister's office 2 days before Rosh Hashanah 2 years ago. It was right at the end of that brutal summer of Tzuk Eitan, which was the brutal war in Gaza. It was a meeting that the Prime Minister called to try and finalize the Kotel negotiations. And I walked into his office, he looked at me, he said, "Thank you." My mom, thankfully, has raised 2 kids, and she taught us manners, so when he said thank you, what did I say? I said, "You're welcome." But then it occurred to me I had no idea why he was thanking me. So I said, "Mr. Prime Minister, I have to simply ask you, why are you thanking me?" He said, "I'm thanking you because Natan Sharansky told me that in the recent war in Gaza, the Reform movement had more young people in Israel than any other movement, and you didn't cancel one trip and you didn't bring one trip back early. I'm saying thank you for the Reform movement's love and commitment to the state of Israel." Friends, that's the underpinning. This is not about, there's some, timid feeling towards the Jewish state. There's deep love and a deep sense of shared partnership. But out of that deep love comes the need to separate religion and state. And we can have a Jewish state without mixing religion and state, without making ultra-Orthodox in charge of billions of shkalim and millions of lives. We need to level the playing field. So we're not done. We're going to fight for civil marriage. We're going to fight for equality and conversion. We're going to fight for equal funding of all expressions of Judaism. We've got an opportunity to live out the real response to Rabbi Sacks' challenge to us, which is what can we build our faith community on? What's the most solid foundation? It's not sibling rivalry. It's not ethnocentricity. It's not tribalism. It is the best of the Jewish tradition. And the best of the Jewish tradition is a Jewish tradition that says Hillel and Shammai both have truth. And by the way, sometimes Shammai wins, sometimes Hillel wins. Shammai tends to be kind of angry about the whole thing, and Hillel has the gift of being both understanding and wise to understand even the arguments that he rejects. So I think we in the Jewish community need to do that. There are people who said, I invited Prime Minister Netanyahu to our biennial in San Diego 2 years ago, and I got some angry emails from people in our movement said, how come you invited Prime Minister Netanyahu? We don't agree with him about everything. I said, I don't agree with myself about everything. And he happens to be the Prime Minister of Israel, and he's working in good faith with us. And we are standing our ground, and we don't agree with everything, but we are going to be respectful, and we're going to be strategic, and we're going to get to good outcomes. We have an opportunity, friends, to exercise our leadership. We are the largest movement in Jewish life. We didn't get to be large so that we could just cower in a corner and hope things get better. We have an obligation, we have an opportunity to reshape the Jewish landscape. The Jewish landscape in North America, around the world, the Jewish landscape of the state of Israel. That's why we have this strength. Because the faith community that we are a part of, that we lead, many of us, is a faith community of such integrity and such depth and such beauty that we want to share it with everyone. And our faith community is a pluralistic faith community. Some people wear a yarmulke, some people don't. That doesn't make me a better Jew, a better rabbi, because I wear one and Rabbi Lustig does not. We have different ways to pray, different ways to learn. We vote differently. I think we learned that. We have different ideas about some of the most important issues facing our country and our world and our Jewish community, like the Iran deal. And we have that diversity. And I saw in the materials that I was given that there's even a civility pledge to be part of these conversations, because even having this conversation in our congregation in Washington Hebrew, there's a danger that we would not be pluralists, that we would say to the others, that is out of bounds and your views are illegitimate. We can be tolerant even of illegitimate views. We can also have something called intolerable deviance. There are 3 categories. I'll just leave you with this. There's pluralism, there's tolerance, there's intolerable deviance. Intolerable deviance is when people twist religion, as Rabbi Sacks writes so extensively about. When people take religious teachings and use it not simply as a battering ram, but as a weapon to kill and to denigrate others. That is intolerable deviance. We have it within our Jewish community, we have it within our Christian community, and yes, we have it in Islam, and we even have it in Burma. We have it in the Buddhist community as well. It knows no boundaries. But what we have is something even more powerful. We have a notion that God doesn't just love us. God loves all our children. God loves all those created in God's image. And because we believe that, we live our faith in a different way. And I hope that we can learn from Rabbi Sacks. I hope that we can be inspired by him. But I hope we can also stand in a Hillel Shammai Machloket L'Shem Shemayim and say to Rabbi Sacks, it is not the case that religion is the answer. It is a certain kind of pluralistic religion that is the answer to the intolerance and the exclusive claims of religion in our day that lead to denigrate others, to elevate some, and to set the table for the kind of violence that we see. It is time for us, friends, to redefine what it means to be a person of faith, to reboot what it means to be someone who is religious, and to have it no longer stand, as it has for the last decades, for intolerance and self-righteousness. Let it stand for openness and honesty and integrity and kindness and compassion and justice. And if it does, can I tell you what the Pew study told us will not be definitive for the future? It will be descriptive of the past. We will be able to actually reshape the trajectory and the very topography of religious life, not only in North America, but around the world in the state of Israel. That's what's at stake. That's what this book is about. That's what our movement is about. And I hope with the great and amazing and inspired congregation that you are privileged to belong to and participate in, along with other places of vitality and imagination within our Jewish world, that we'll be able to reframe and to reshape the Jewish future. And I have a feeling, I have a commitment, I have a clear sense that that future is going to be bright, it is going to be strong, it is going to be pluralistic, and it is going to be respectful. And that is something we're staking our lives on. And so I'm honored to be here tonight. I look forward to some intense and hard questions and answers. But remember, in the spirit of Hillel and Shammai, let's have only a machloket l'shem shemayim, an argument for the sake of heaven. It's not personal. It's always respectful. It's about substance, not about personality. And it's about the future that we get to shape. So thank you for this invitation. Thank you for this opportunity, and let's continue.
We want to thank Rabbi Jacobs because it's very insightful. He is the most important thing is that those of us who've seen him in action know that it is not just what he is professing here, but he lives it each and every day. And in fact, we were privileged to watch him stand in the Knesset, where were there 13 members that came in, 15 or 19 or whatever. So Knesset operates. There's an open committee, and people walk in and walk out and say their say. And we watched one after another come in and talk about how important the work of the Reform movement was and is in Israel to create this opportunity for pluralism. There are cards around if you want to ask questions. I'm going to do a couple of quick commercials for us. One, were the Beatles right? Is love the only thing you need? We've got our discussions starting this Sunday, March 6th, Tuesday, March 8th, Wednesday, March 9th, and this Friday. So if you haven't registered and you want to come and do the conversation, please come. Now, in the brilliance of our Amram lecture, this summer I had written up and I was dying to get a particular speaker, Bruce Hoffman, to come speak in our con. And I mentioned the idea to Leslie Maitland, and Leslie said, well, that's nice, except I've already got him coming for AmRam Scholar Series. When we talk about this idea of our own situation, Bruce Hoffman's book, he's going to be speaking on Does Terrorism Work? He has a particular book which takes a look at and deals with some of the underlying situations. When we look at it, one of the things is my hero is perhaps your terrorist, and your terrorist is my hero. And it's a very important thing. He'll be looking at the underpinnings of Zionism. Does terrorism work? He'll be applying that to Zionism. He is one of the world's experts on terrorism, and we're delighted that he'll be joining us in the AmRam Scholar Series on March 13th at 10:30. Our next keynote is the ambassador, U.S. Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom, who we know as Rabbi David Saperstein. He is now Ambassador Saperstein. He'll be coming to talk about the Obama administration's effort on behalf of religious freedom and interreligious coexistence worldwide and the United States. So I'm going to start this off. I'm going to let you take the podium back, and I'm going to begin the questions if you want to, and some will come. Take my pen, come on up. So Rick, Rabbi, you spoke to us about all these things, and we know that you have really worked very hard through IRAC, the Israel Religious Action Center, through the coalitions, that this agreement that he's talking about is the first time an agreement has been achieved without litigation. That's the amazing part as well. But we know that these are policy changes. What policy doesn't really change attitude? What will the things that we need to do to begin to change attitude within the interreligious and in religious faiths in general? Nikki, I'll take some of those in your hand. Thank you.
So it's a great question. If you look at the history of the civil rights movement, we know that we had great victories in terms of civil rights legislation. We're grateful that the Voting Rights Act was written on the conference table at the Religious Action Center in Washington, D.C., just up the street. But changing consciousness is different than changing laws or passing a legislation. But what we're talking about here is changing the awareness, and that's why the Kotel is so significant, because it's the most symbolic place on the planet, right? And Natan Sharansky said the mantra is one wall for one people. Well, if we can have one wall for one people, we can have one state for all Jewish people, and also for all the minorities that live in that Jewish state, because God loves them just the same. So we can actually have the inspiration to change our attitudes as well as the law. But currently it is legal for the Minister of Religious Affairs to spew out a vile hatred about us, and he can still get up in the morning, have breakfast, and go to work. So we do have to actually change the legal structures, and we do have to pass legislation. But we're trying to shape, and this is something I know that Rabbi Lessig and I were at services at Ohel Avraham in Haifa, and one of the two rabbis, Gabi Dagan, who has been mentored by Rabbi Lustig. It's one of the most inspiring Friday night services. And who did I sit next to? A gentleman. I was not a regular worshiper there. I sat next to a gentleman who kept asking me the page numbers. He kept looking over, and I'm happy to show him. But it turns out he was a Muslim resident of Haifa who's working on a project with Ohel Avraham. They're changing consciousness. They're changing lives, changing hearts and minds. We're doing that by growing the seeds of pluralism, where there's more respect and more ability to live, not just in harmony, but in deep relationship with people of other, faith backgrounds and people within our faith. But that is a longer-term strategy. Are we done with civil rights in this country? We carried, how many people were part of the march from Selma, Alabama to Washington, D.C. this past summer that the Reform movement led with the NAACP? Why were we retracing the steps of the civil rights movement? Because we are still fighting those same battles. We had a rally with 5,000 people in Raleigh, North Carolina for voting rights. It felt like not just deja vu, it felt sick. that we hadn't accomplished what we set out to do. So we're changing the hearts and minds still in this country around race, around the ability for there to be true equality. We've got our work to do, but let's not miss the big steps along the way. And we won this with negotiation. We won this with our collective strength. The Prime Minister was asked, do you love the Reform movement? Do you believe in religious pluralism? And I watched him not answer and that's not a dig, it's just an observation. He actually doesn't have a personal feeling about religious pluralism. What he has a feeling about is that the majority of Jews in the diaspora live here in North America and should not get a black eye every time they open the newspaper or go to Israel. He gets that. That's strategic. And the ability to live in relationship with Israel. And by the way, we are giving gifts every day to the state of Israel. We get hundreds of Israeli shlichim come every summer. And they populate not only our summer camps, but our youth movement and some of our congregations. And then they go back. So the head of the Jewish agency said, it's pretty nice that we give you those kids every summer. I said, and it's pretty nice we send you back Jewish people who love the Judaism they first tasted here. We're in a moment, we're changing the consciousness that Jewish life is more authentic in Israel or it's more authentic here. There's vitality in both. We need to grow that. And when we grow that, it won't take legislation, it won't take Supreme Court rulings. It'll be in the very water that we drink and the society that we create. But we've got work to do.
So we were at Beit Daniel, and it was great. We all had lunch there. 400 plus of us, or 300 plus, I don't know, penitentiary style, because we could barely fit in. But what a magnificent opportunity. And I think what has happened is that the rabbis at Beit Daniel, which is the Reform Center in Tel Aviv, are now responsible for the primary education and the curriculum for the children of Tel Aviv, which is very, very important. There are a number of questions here. How can you reconcile Rabbi Sacks' intolerance with Reform Judaism with his desire to build bridges within the Abrahamic faiths? Now, I'm going to give you a little background here because, as you know, when Rabbi Sacks spoke, for us, he spoke at American University. He spoke at American University because he refused to speak in a Reform congregation. And he really didn't realize that the last name of the president of American University kind of fooled him a little bit, and didn't realize that he was a member of our congregation and a Reformed Jew who actually extended an invitation on behalf. So he agreed to speak at American University because he'd speak in a university, but he wouldn't speak. We all know about the incident. He didn't attend Hugo Green's funeral, a pillar of European Jewry. And yet we have a book that really talks about building these bridges between. How do we reconcile those things? And as a world leader who, has to sit at the same table.
First of all, I think with Rabbi Sacks, let's look at the glass that's half full. This is an extraordinary and brilliant man who lives both an integrity and a beauty of the Jewish tradition and has a deep tolerance for, I think, many different strands of religiosity. He's not a pluralist. I want to underscore that. Does not mean he's not a person of depth. But how are we going to convince a Rabbi Sacks? I don't know that we will. And I don't know that we're going to convince all of the leaders within Orthodoxy, but there are many who accord us enormous dignity. I want to just tell you one story. Have you ever heard of Chabad? Of course you have. So the head of Chabad is a man named Rabbi Yehuda Krinsky. He's an extraordinary man, and one of our members, Harry Kaufman, arranged for me to go to meet with the head of Chabad when I first came into this position. And I said to my office, I said, well, he's welcome to come here, or maybe it would be easier for him if I went there. And so I went to, he said it would be easier if I went there. That's fine. So I arrive at 770 Eastern Parkway, and I walk in and I sit down in his office. By the way, the most modest office, and this is a religious empire, and this is ultra-Orthodox Judaism. Let's just say it loudly and plainly. I sit down, and he looks at me. He said, Rabbi Jacobs, can we be frank? I said, that would be great. That would mean that you can be frank and that I could be frank, and we may actually have a conversation that will be of value. So he leaned forward. He said, what are you so busy doing? You don't care about mitzvot. You don't care about Shabbat. You don't care about kashrut. So what are you so busy getting people into your movement for? And then he leaned back. So I thought to myself, this is an opportunity either just to kind of pretend he didn't say all the things he said, or as I learned playing tennis as a kid, hit the ball back. So I said, Rabbi Krinsky, we actually do care deeply about mitzvot. We care deeply about Shabbat and kashrut, but we happen to care differently than you do. And I'm here because I actually admire the way you do your work. So I'd love for you to share some of the thinking that goes into the way you live out Jewish life. Well, we developed this little friendship. He invited me to their biennial. They call it the Kinus HaShluchim. And I get my invitation, and I think, all right, that was nice of him, but I'm sure I'm sitting in the very back, where the oddballs are put. So I get there, and I'm looking around. It's a hangar in Brooklyn. There are 5,000 people, just like at our biennial. And I'm looking for my table. You've been to the weddings. You're looking for, table number 27. So I'm looking for my table. And I see a table where Rabbi Krinsky's sitting. I said, that can't be my table. Well, it is my table. Well, I must be at the other side of the table for Rabbi Krinsky. So each name is at a place. I'm sitting next to Rabbi Krinsky. Not only that, but every one of those 5,000 shluchim came up during the dinner to pay their respects to the leader of Chabad. And you know what he said to every single one of them? Not one miss. He said, do you know my friend and colleague, Rabbi Rick Jacobs? He didn't have to say my friend, he didn't have to say my colleague, and he didn't have to say rabbi. He said all of them to every single one. And it was an expression of genuine love. He happened to call me right before Rosh Hashanah this year, and I was at our camp in Warwick, New York, Camp Kutz, and my phone rang. It was a 718 number. I didn't know it. Picked it up, and Rabbi Krinsky said, I just called to wish the Reform movement a good Yontif. I thought to myself, he's actually, I don't think, trying to do it. And I thought to myself, wish I called him first. So I put a calendar reminder. Next week, I'm calling him to wish him a good Yontif. Now, why do I tell you that story? Because I tell you that story because we actually have relationships that are founded on tolerance. Rabbi Krinsky is not a pluralist. I can assure you he's not a pluralist. He doesn't have the same definition of Jewish community and Jewishness that we have, but he is unbelievably tolerant, and he's a model for people that we can work with. And we can argue with him, and we do. But that's something, it's an accomplishment to have a more tolerant relationship to people who are very different. The pluralism is the underpinning that I think is the key, but I don't think we should say that we're not going to talk to people who are not pluralists. But let's model the places where we can be not only respectful, but really elevate the Jewish, feeling that we are all together somehow part of one people and one faith. And that's an extraordinary thing. I want to make sure that people know Rabbi David Saperstein just snuck in. Rabbi Saperstein can't sneak into any gathering of the Reform movement and now any faith community in the world. And Rabbi Saperstein will be speaking, and I would just tell you that he is now the ambassador for international religious freedom, and he is not only representing our pluralistic faith community, but he's traveling the world over and trying to bring about an end to not in God's name. So his talk that he will give later this spring is going to be something that you should not miss. And he is the best of our tradition. He's the best of our movement. And now he's doing it for the whole world, which is good for the State Department of the United States. But boy, do we miss him on a daily basis. But be sure not to miss that opportunity. We can do better as a people, but let's not hold that standard of pluralism to be the only way we measure our improvements.
So, there are a lot of things that we talk about on this level. But what are the things that you would see? You have 900 congregations. What are the things that we should be doing and that you think that we as Reformed Jews should be speaking out? Because, there's a little bit of what's going on not only in the political world as we see, but it's a little bit of Reverend Niemöller, which is, they came first for the communists, and I said nothing. Our American Jewish community has on a lot of these issues, and especially the Reform movement, besides you as the head, has been very quiet on a lot of issues. And I mean, well, look, in some of the issues and the tension between J Street and AIPAC, between some of these things that are going on, when we see injustice, a father was just telling me of what's going on Vassar's University here in talking about where we have been quiet from the fear of controversy, and that quietness has gotten us rolled over a lot of times.
All right, so let me describe what quietness looks like. I was invited last year to speak at the J Street conference. I was also invited to speak at the AIPAC conference, so you would assume that it's one or the other, right? Because you can't speak at both of them. And if you do, you can't bring the same message at both of them. But it turns out I said yes to both. And when I said yes to speaking at the J Street conference, I can tell you that a whole world within our movement got righteously indignant. And a couple of very, very prominent people came up and said, "You cannot go there." And I said, let me just state it plainly. There are 1,000 college leaders called J Street U. They invited me, and they invited me to give the keynote. What do you want me to tell those 1,000 leaders on our college campus who every day stand up against BDS, stand up for the state of Israel, stand up for the Jewish people? I said, you may differ with how they express their Zionism, but it is Zionism nonetheless. So I take issue with the silence. There's been nothing that I would call silent about our response. And frankly, we as a Jewish community, and one of the things that we said, again, this is the deep hot water of our moment with the Iran deal. We said that we believed that there was actually a case to be made for and a case to be made against. We made a commitment to try and work with the U.S. administration to make the Iran deal better, and to make sure after it was, if it were approved, that we could still be a Jewish community the day after. A lot of people thought that that was an unacceptable answer. It was one, frankly, that set the norm. The Federation in New York followed the suit. The Conference of Presidents, the largest umbrella organization in Jewish life, also followed suit. And we took enormous heat both from the U.S. administration and from the Israeli administration, because they both wanted us to say yay or nay. And we said that would not be responsible, because sitting in our pews on Rosh Hashanah were people who believed strongly in the Iran deal, people who were deeply opposed. At the end of the day, Israel needed not only a community in North America to be committed to Israel, but it be bipartisan and that it be across lines. And, there are people like Jerry Nadler, a wonderful congressman from New York, who went out on a limb and supported the deal and was told, we will make sure that you will never, be reelected. There was a harshness to that discussion.
I'm going to interrupt, because there's no question you have been an outstanding leader, and I said besides you. And I mean this in a sense, because even in a sense within our congregation, which is, we have tremendous amount of area, because of the lack of civility that has preceded on so many levels, because of the tensions that we find, because of the group that come to you and make the threats that you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that, in that sense, the majority of our 900 congregations end up being Melba toast and parv. And what I mean by that is that they're not going to be meat or fleischig in terms of, and this whole series that we're having here is because we as a Reform movement have never been afraid of ideas and never been afraid to take on challenges in terms of this. So I'm asking you as a leader, how do we emulate in the same way? And I want to give you an example on this. You were the only Jewish leader that had the guts to take on the large Christian movements who were talking about divestment. Nobody else showed up. You show up, everybody beats you up. You convened a group of people in terms of what is it that you want from us in the trenches to help actualize that? Because I don't know if is it public now about the group that you brought together? It is now. But tell them a little bit about that, because that's a very powerful organic element where you asked for us to do this.
So the answer, by the way, was not just that I spoke at J Street, but also happily and very, very enthusiastically spoke at AIPAC. It's not as if there's either or. There are ways to express. They're pluralist among Jews. They're pluralist among Zionists. And I think that we need, and the courage that it takes to be, by the way, a rabbinic or lay leader of a community where there's deep divisions, and there are deep divisions. There's no doubt about it. To do it in a way that is constructive, that actually brings us to a deeper place of understanding and to an activism. But what happens in too many of our congregations is that rabbis and leaders are afraid of all these hard subjects, so they simply back away from them and just leave them alone. They're too important. They're too important for us to walk away from. So with the Presbyterian Church, you'll remember that a year and a half ago, now it's a year and 3/4, they passed what was a resolution on divesting their church holdings from the state of Israel. I was invited to speak at their General Assembly, which is their biennial. I was given 5 whole minutes. They said, if you don't need the full 5 minutes, please don't take the full 5 minutes. We have a lot of things on the agenda. And they said, and please don't make any arguments against our divestment resolution. Just bring us warm greetings. And by the way, they said, if it goes well, the next morning you'll be able to speak against the divestment resolution. So I took that as a very clear instruction. And in the midst of my words, this was right after the 3 Israeli teens had been kidnapped. So I said in my 5 minutes, I said I was very moved today by the prayer expression of the Presbyterian Church. You were so heartfelt and beautiful, praying for people in Sri Lanka, praying for people in the Congo. I went through the geography. It was unbelievably moving. I said, can I ask you right now to join me in a prayer for 3 Israeli teenagers who were kidnapped simply on their way home from school? I'll spare you the whole thing, but afterwards someone came up and said to me, Rabbi Jacobs, did you ask us to pray for 3 settlers? I said, no, I did not. Well, who are those 3 Israeli teens? I said, they're 3 Israeli teens. Are they not part of your circle of humanity and concern? I said, we've got some fundamental agreements that we need to come to. So it turns out that the majority of the leadership of the Presbyterian Church actually disagreed with the church's stance about divestment. And they have very close relations. And to invite Rabbi Lustig and our colleagues through North America who are very, very close and work in interfaith ways that, frankly, no one else in the Jewish community has been doing. And they are now poised to raise their voice at the coming GA this June, where there may be a resolution for a one-state solution. So raise your voices. Let's raise our collective voices, Jews and Presbyterians together, for real progress and a real vision of a 2-state solution for a shared society, for mutual respect. So we've got hard work to do, and it's in interfaith places, it's in the Middle East, it's in our own congregations, and right here in this election, friends, for the President of the United States, you don't have to go looking for where those divisions are. Can we model what a Jewish community can be? A place where we can have deep, honest debates and to do it with deep respect. That's not happening in our community. It's not happening in our country. Let it happen. Let us lift up the very best of our tradition. And let's be courageous. Let's be willing to do it here. Let's be willing to do it with churches. Let's be willing to do it with African American leaders. That's the reason that the march from Selma to Washington, D.C. was co-sponsored by the Reform Movement and the NAACP was not an accident. We actually share a faith commitment about the society we are shaping. But to speak out about racial tensions in places like Ferguson, that's a little bit agitational today. But what is our prophetic mantle if it's not to stand for something in the world? And why do people continue to join Washington Hebrew and other congregations in our movement? Because we stand for something. And we don't stand for we're right and you're wrong. There are times when it sounds pretty much like that, because we don't tolerate hatred, and we don't tolerate violence in the name of God, but we fight it with the best tools that we have, which is our intelligence and our values, and we're doing that effectively. And you are doing spectacular things here at Washington Hebrew. You needed me to come to tell you that. I'm telling you the plain and simple truth. And we need you to do more of it, the vitality of these discussions, the vitality of the education, and frankly, the vitality of the various ways that Jewish life comes alive within these walls. And we need to be a beacon, because remember, we're redefining what it means to be a person of faith in the 21st century. It's not about only a synagogue. It's not about only a movement. It's about redrawing the map of faith. And if we do that, there's a lot of promise. But right now, a lot of folks are doing it for us, and it's a map that embarrasses us and demeans us.
Well, we want to, when I opened up and I said, that Levantus, when we glance at a person, it means that we have a responsibility, and that's because Levantus understands that in any eye that sees another human being, there's a reflection of that human being. You have not only lived that, but you lead us in that way. You challenge us because we read books like this, which are not aligned with our thinking, because we may learn from somebody else's perspective. We want to thank you for your leadership. There's the old Hasidic story which talks about how do we deal and know that the end of night has come. One says, when there's a star that's come out, another says you can see your hand in the distance, because then, and the Rebbe comes and says, the way that night has ended and day has come is when I see another human being and I see the image of God. You have taught us that, you live that, and we're very, very honored for your leadership and all that you do in so many avenues. I was on the bus and I was falling asleep in the back. We were traveling from an extraordinary Shabbat with Gabi Dagan and the Ohel Avraham. By the way, in a building that was built by a former president family. Jack Lerman and his wife gave the money to build the original building at Leo Beck. And I turned to Rick and I said, the jet lag. And he goes, what do you know of jet lag? He says, it doesn't bother me. I asked him if he was going to be asleep on Wednesday. He has traveled from continent to continent, from country to country, representing us, always standing tall. And Rick, I will tell you, it's not the height of a man, it's the stature of a man. And your stature is by your character and by your commitment and your compassion, and that we give real thanks for.
Thank you.